Така, сега предстои представяне на една много интересна презентация от първият от нашите чуждестранни гости. Това е Йерон Колхас и той ще говори за изкуството на фавелите в Южна Америка. Моля да го приветстваме. Йерон Колхас е артист, съосновател на фавела пейнтинг, натрупва популярност с работата си в Южна Америка, чрез създаване на мащабни стенописи, отразяващи местната култура. Инициативата Фавела пейнтинг обединява хората около подобряване на градската среда, в която живеят. Проектът започва в фавелите на Рио, последващи издания се случват в градове като Майами, Амстердам и Хаити. Чрез ангажиране на местните общности, проектът спомага за преодоляването на предразсъдъци, насърчава устойчиви решения и създава работни места, като укрепва чувството за сплотеност и общност. А сега повече ще ви разкаже и самият той.
Thank you. We're going from talking about situations of regulation and planning to situations where there are no rules and there's no planning, informal communities mostly. So this is where my journey begins 20 years ago in Rio de Janeiro, in a community which is classified as a favela, an informal community. I started working there together with Dre Urhan 20 years ago, and I will take you on a very fast-paced adventure through several projects. These communities are seen as low income, dangerous, and criminal, and we wanted to do something about that stigma, and our idea was to work with painting. So I want to give you some things that we've learned over the years of how you can engage communities and to see if you can empower people to work with their environment in their own communities. So one of the first lessons that we learned is that if you take something that is already present in the community and you try to involve that into your project, that is a great start. So in Rio we saw that a lot of children are flying kites, and for our first mural we thought, okay, that is a great idea to see if we can incorporate that into our first mural. Another important thing is that we started working in these communities with one goal, and that is to maximize the amount of collaboration or cooperation with the locals. So what we did is we trained local youth to work with us, and we had another rule, and that is we would never have anybody working for free. Everybody would always get paid for the work that they did with us. A lot of the process is not just painting, it's fixing up the walls, talking to people, and for instance finding somebody that can organize the scaffolding. In this case, somebody actually built it for us. So this is the first mural that we made in 2006. This is the community where this took place. It's a community called Villa Cruzeiro, part of a bigger complex of informal housing. You can basically imagine that these people build their own houses, their own community without any planning. It's an organically grown community. As you might know, favelas, these are places of exclusion. A lot of the children growing up there don't have the same chances as people have in more affluent neighborhoods, and this often results in them going into crime. And one of our goals was to work with a local organization that would try to keep these young people from going into crime and give them alternatives like working with us, and maybe that would inspire them to pursue a different career. I could not take pictures of people holding the guns in Rio because that would be dangerous. But you have to imagine that in the whole community you see young people with machine guns, hand grenades everywhere. So they are patrolling the streets like soldiers, actually child soldiers. These are two of the young boys that help us make this first painting, and with one of the goals to try and keep them from getting into the crime. Here you see some of the pictures. I would just be going quite fast through some of these pictures. I won't be giving an explanation for everything. This is a picture from the newspaper of the same neighborhood where a big police invasion had just arrested a lot of the people that are in the drug trade. So this kind of news would be on a daily basis of the same neighborhood where we were working, and we were trying to prove that even though there is all this crime, that there's a lot of good energy in these neighborhoods and that you can actually change things by collaborating. And one of the first results we achieved was that we got The Guardian to actually write about our project. The Guardian being an international newspaper, this was quite a big marker for success for us, showing that we could place these neighborhoods in a different light. And as you see here, this church that is part of our painting is actually the pride of the neighborhood, because it's the Church of Peña. And you here see one of the residents with even got a tattoo of that church. So what's very important for us is that we always looked at how can we try to represent this neighborhood. And it's kind of, you could see it as a kind of informal way of marketing. And now the symbol of the boy flying the kite has even become really a part of how the neighborhood is portrayed. This is the Instagram page for the neighborhood with 70,000 followers, almost the same amount of residents that the neighborhood has. And so you could see they adopted this symbol as part of the neighborhood. Unfortunately, there being so much violence between the drug gang and the police, the painting got shot many times, even the bullet in the middle of the forehead of the young boy. Here you can see many bullet holes. And we went back in 2010 to recreate the whole painting because we thought it was sad that this symbol for the neighborhood got damaged. And here you see us remaking the whole painting again. The second project, we found this street that had just been made to stop water from coming down the hill, and before that had caused a landslide and houses had come down the hill. So we thought this is a crazy place to actually incorporate an art piece. And since we thought it looked like a river already of concrete, we thought, well, let's paint this into a river. And we've invited Rob Admiraal, a Dutch tattoo artist famous for his Japanese style of tattooing, which happens to be very popular in Brazil. We invited him to come and make the design with us. So in this time, we did not have the graphic connection in the sense of the boy flying the kite, but we found that the culture of tattoos, which is very popular in Brazil, would be another way to connect to young people and to create a project that would somehow make a connection. It took us 8 months to make this painting. Here you see an original line drawing from Rob, and here you see us how we sketched out these images on the concrete. This is us teaching the boys how to work with grid system to lay out the drawings on the walls, and they got better and better at it. And we worked initially with 4 and later with three young boys. I say boys, but they were like 19, 20. Obviously we were paying them while training them to make this painting over the course of about 8 months. So one of the important things that while we were living and staying in this place is that making a painting and working on the project is one thing, but the more important thing almost is the amount of time you spend there, and we really immersed ourselves in the community. So we spent a lot of time organizing barbecues and parties and hanging out with the residents and creating around us a kind of atmosphere of being together and organizing things together, which is part of the empowerment process of how art can get people to work together and think about what you can do in a street. How can you solve problems, for instance, trash, and how can you deal with the violence around you. And here you see the kind of atmosphere that we created around us, which I will never forget. And I will never forget with how much hospitality people invited us into their homes and neighborhoods. And these are the kind of problems that I'm sure you see here, and you see in any neighborhood or area where people are dealing with poverty or disorganization or neglect from the government, and where people have to come and organize these things themselves. This is supposed to be a video, but this was a video. I don't think it's playing, but it's a video of the amount of shooting that we would sometimes hear, and the kids would be hiding out in the house while police were flying over with helicopters and shooting at the drug dealers and back and forth. Resulting in these kinds of messages, which in Portuguese, this newspaper headline says, "The police breaks 5 in Vila Cruzeiro." Breaking means killing. 5 being a low number. Sometimes the police would kill 25 to 30 people at the same time. And it even got so bad that during the time of the Olympics, the government sent in the army because they were afraid that there would be bad press for if there was violence breaking out during this international event. Here you see the soldiers patrolling the streets with a very heavy like presence, and imagine living in a neighborhood where that is happening on a yearly basis. And so the young boys that we worked with, we tried to keep them, you know, on the straight path, but unfortunately the young boy with the red scarf hiding his face went into the drug gang and subsequently got killed 1 year later by the police. Some more images of the painting. So what was before a gray area, we were able to transform into a public space where you see the name Rio Cruzeiro, which was came from the name Vila Cruzeiro, but we said now we're called the River Cruzeiro, and so it became a place to represent the neighborhood and also a place to come together and see what art can do or how it can make a difference. Here you can see kind of the scale of how big this was. It took us 8 months. What we always thought was very important also is to think about, if you're painting, if you're doing a project like that, what other ways around it can you imagine to get people to take part in it? Even if, because only 3 boys were painting, so that's quite a low amount of people participating. So what we did is always see if we can get other kids to teach them how to film, or for instance, the kids that were working with us, we taught them to do administration, to work on all the financial sides of the project so we can maximize the amount of different kinds of learning that we could incorporate into this project. And this was the opening party. As you see, we even made t-shirts with the name of the neighborhood on it as a kind of marketing and say we're putting this neighborhood into a positive light. And then the news channels came, and basically every news channel from Rio came, and some national Brazilian news channels came as well. And for these people, for the residents that were living in this neighborhood, a lot of this time, this is the first time anybody asked them anything positive about the neighborhood. Because otherwise, the only time they saw their neighborhood on the news was because of violence and guns and shooting and drugs. So after this project, we wanted to step up and make bigger projects happen, because this had proven to be quite successful, and we got quite a lot of media attention. So we started thinking, designing, and working on ideas to make this bigger, with ultimately the dream to work on this scale. So we made models. Actually, on the last slide, we made our own foam cutter. I'm sure you architects, some of you use foam cutters. And when we were in Brazil, we couldn't get one, so we made our own, and making models of how these informal structures could be colored. And then we were invited in 2010 to think about a project on a much larger scale in a different community in Rio. So I took the design ideas I had and applied them to this location. And we got approval from the residents. We went to every house and talked about the design and what colors would go on their house. Quite an extensive process. And we got approval to make this much larger project to happen in a different neighborhood in Rio. This neighborhood was a bit calmer. There wasn't as much violence, so it was easier to work. And we had a crew of 30 people working with us during a period of about 2 months, very fast. Much faster, because we had much more organization, we had a bigger budget, and we had a sponsorship from a paint company. The first 2 projects were basically paid for by ourselves, and this was on a new scale, with sponsor with the paint company, and a lot of help from them to get the press and everything organized. Here you see some of the impressions of what it was like to work on much higher and harder to reach locations. And this location became after we were finished, became a central spot for the community where the children would practice their capoeira or other cultural events would happen. And this art project generated an immense amount of press. We were featured on all the Brazilian channels. This is an Angolan video clip that was filmed there. There was actually official tourist tours developed around it, and people started guiding tourists around the neighborhood. This is a picture of this the same project on the New York Times Arts and Leisure cover. And so this is part of our goal, to see if the negative stigma that is attached to one of these neighborhoods could be transformed into something positive by showing you can work with people. These people are not criminals or degenerates like the other media will have you think. An exhibition in New York where we were showing our work. And I think one of the more interesting parts is that these projects generated energy all around the world for other people to make similar projects happen, even on a much larger scale. For instance, this is a project in Mexico, which is much larger scale than we did, but we know that this was inspired by our work because we know the people who organized it. This is a project in Chile, Antofagasta, where we were invited also to help start some of the research for the project. This is Bogota, Colombia. This is I think Puerto Rico. This is Indonesia, obviously inspired even design-wise on our project. This is Indonesia. And so as you can see, this idea took hold and inspired a lot of people to do the same. And I think for us it was amazing to see that, because we were not necessarily thinking about this in a copyright way or anything like that. Oh, they're taking our idea. We thought the opposite. We thought if this idea can expand, and for other people, if they can get into that, then that's a positive thing. After all this news coverage of this last project, we were invited to Philadelphia, a large city in North America, where there's actually a very large program of murals. So they have an organization called the Mural Arts Program with over 3,000 large-scale murals in the city. And they said, well, are you interested in coming to our city and making a mural here with our community, working together with our communities? And Philadelphia has some of the poorest neighborhoods in the United States. Really, after the industrial decline of all the industry that was in the city, that industry left a lot of these neighborhoods very disenfranchised and without jobs. And so they thought, if you guys can come and do a community project here, this is how a lot of the neighborhoods looked: boarded up houses, streets, or even whole blocks burnt down, and very little opportunity for the youth, a lot of violence. And so we went there, we stayed there for almost 2 years, moved into the neighborhood in North Philadelphia, and rented a house there and started organizing the youth to come and work with us on this project. This actually could not be done if we didn't first spend time there to make the connections with the right kind of community leaders who would get these youth on board, because it's not easy to get youth who otherwise might be selling crack on the corner to say stop doing that and come work on an art project. So we worked with local community leaders to get that done. This design process was interesting and very complicated, because we painted over 50 buildings in this area, commercial buildings. And so a lot of the time, these buildings would be owned by somebody outside the city, rented by somebody in the neighborhood, but not living in the neighborhood. And so it would be very hard to get the design approvals for these individual buildings. And not even just that, a city like Philadelphia is, like you were talking about before, is a city with many rules. So here we had to get approval for every little step we took. Otherwise, as you might know about North America, people are able to sue you, or you have liabilities like that, and you don't want that. So you want to get everything legally fixed and on paper before you do anything. Something that we never had to do in Rio, because basically in Rio you just ask for the drug dealer's permission and then nobody can really complain. So the idea was, how can we get a design for every building separate because you have to talk to the owner or the person that runs the store, but you also want all the buildings to be connected. So we thought about a design that would weave all the color preferences from the different tenants and owners together. A process that took about a year to create. So here you see a building before, all like boarded up windows, and here you see how that could be turned into a design. Of course, we were working with a team of about 12 to 15 painters, so I would have to create very specific design drawings for every building. And we even made models to see how designs could run around corners and stuff like that. Here we see the team working on the first layers of paint, and many of the buildings would have to be fixed before we could actually paint them. Here's an impression of what that would look like when all the colors are connected, and how this gray and brown environment was then turned into a very vibrant whole. Some of the stories are funny because if you're talking about colors in a neighborhood with a lot of different people, you get into interesting discussions. For instance, this shop is owned by a Korean lady who has had her shop in that neighborhood for years, but the neighborhood is a predominantly black neighborhood, and they have very different ideas of color. So this is the first building we painted, and the Korean lady chose, I think, quite typically Korean colors. And then when we painted the building, we had a lot of people coming up to us complaining how these colors were not representative of the African American population of the neighborhood. Luckily, when we painted more and more buildings, that perception started to change and more people came on board. Another thing that we did there was to make a small community space where we could get people with questions to come to us, or children that somehow wanted to take part but wouldn't be able to go on the lifts and paint, that they could come and paint in this interior space. And it was kind of like a hub for anybody interested or anybody wanted to be involved to come and talk to us. Unfortunately, the neighborhood has not really improved since then. And I don't think we ever also promised that through a painting project you can improve a whole neighborhood, because we get that question a lot, like, did crime go down, or did more people go to school, or did unemployment go down? And I think those are not the right kind of questions to ask, because you are working with a smaller group of people, and the kind of impact that you make is very specific, especially on the people that work with you or the people that you interact with. But a project like this always has to be part of a larger effort, citywide effort to change things. And if a neighborhood is not getting the right kind of attention from the city or the right kind of funding to change things, then a painting project cannot just do it by itself. So. But it was an amazing experience. Again, we barbecued, we hung out with the locals, we were living there, so we became part of the fabric. And we, just like in the earlier projects, we also invited an aspect of journalism into the project. So we created our own film team. We created several episodes where we documented this whole process with local people presenting, local people filming, and so this is all in a way to see how large can you create the local involvement. Our team was then presented after the project was successfully ended with certificates from the mayor of the city, where they got the special honor of having worked in the city. Unfortunately, just like in the project before, circumstances for some of our painters did not change. This was my good friend Milk, who later was shot by the police and died in prison a few years after we finished the project. This is I sometimes make portraits of people who pass away to give to their families, and these were two people who had passed away in the local violence in the years after the project. Here's to give some of an idea of the scale of that project. It took about 2 years to happen. And this, unlike in Rio, was actually a project with a lot of planning, a lot of involvement with the city. We had funding from the Ford Foundation, from the local Chamber of Commerce. So unlike Rio, here you have to be very embedded in the fabric of local politics. But we see it as a successful project because at the same time it generated a new way of looking at that neighborhood. And for a lot of the people who did work with us, they went into mural painting or into other professions, and this helped them stay out of a life of crime. So next on the adventure is Haiti, Port-au-Prince, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And we were invited through a Dutch relief fund to see if we could help talk about and rebuild a community that had been partially destroyed in the 2010 earthquake, which was disastrous and killed, I think, something like 200,000 people during that time and in the hurricane that came afterwards. Here we were presented with a neighborhood where, just like in Rio, the houses are made of raw brick, and people make them themselves, and some of these houses also run the risk of, if there's a new earthquake, to collapse again. So here, together with local community members, we found ways of looking at these houses, fixing some of the infrastructure, the stairways between that had been destroyed and never fixed after the earthquake. And we went on to a community project where we worked with a big team to plaster and paint these houses, restore the infrastructure, and see how much we could do to reconstruct this neighborhood. Just like in before, we tried to find something that people would feel connected to in a design or artistic way. So what we looked at was the local tap-tap buses, which is the transport system that you see in Haiti, where there's buses and vans which are very heavily decorated with very bright colors and themes of lines. And we thought that would be a good thing to apply to these buildings. Here you see some of these amazing buses that you see all over Haiti, even with like decorations of airplanes on it to make them look like they'll go faster. So we made workshops happen with local artists and made models to see how that theme of tap-tap buses could be incorporated into the design of the houses. We went on several trips to Haiti to make that happen and to see if we can get, through community engagement, get people excited about this project and do several, like testing of how that design with the lines could work locally. Another very important thing is that, of course, every house has different people living in it, and you want to involve them all as much as possible into the process of how their house will be colored, and to see if that can be a personalized process with the goal, of course, that they will be very happy with the results. But at the same time, if you get every house to look drastically different, you run the risk of the whole thing not becoming coherent, and you also want this project to look like something that is incorporated all the people in the community to work together and not just individually. So what we did is to talk to all the residents about their color choices and preferences and see if we could turn that into designs that were simple enough for local people to create in a reasonable amount of time, and that would give the residents the kind of colors that they want. So here you see options that they could choose from, the design patterns, and here you see some of the way that we were working with local people and scaffolding that is made locally out of wood. And here are some of the designs for recreating the infrastructure and making it safer for old people, for instance, to walk up and down the neighborhood. Even thinking about creating new ways of painting, like pigmented plaster. You see the young man spraying here. And again, local community engagement, organizing barbecues, making sure that we as foreigners, because of course we are outsiders, and this is very apparent in Haiti because we are white and it's a very predominantly black country, and you are, as a white person, very much an outsider and not necessarily something that's not something positive necessarily there. So you have to really pay a lot of attention how you present yourself and how you make sure that you have an open way of communicating and that you ask questions and you're not telling people what you think, but you're asking them what they think. And here again, doing local journalism and getting people involved. The next step is Guatemala, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. It's Lago de Atitlan, a very high lake in the mountains of Guatemala, surrounded by volcanoes, and a small local community where they do a lot of traditional weaving techniques, and you'll see that in their clothes. And we were asked by a local community effort if we can help give advice on a bigger painting project that they were about to embark on over there. And here you see the traditional clothing with all the beautiful colors and weaving that they use. And we decided, well, let's see if we can incorporate that into the designs. And we worked together with the local crafts women mostly to see how we could take those designs and turn those into wall designs. I'm going to run through a few more projects. So this is not necessarily a community project, but we try to turn it into one because in Miami, it's the street art capital of the world. There's an area called Wynwood, and all the major street art artists go there to create murals, and we were invited to create one, to be a part of this mural festival. But we had the opportunity to use an empty store space, so what would otherwise just be a wall painting, we turned into a space where anybody who felt like it could come and paint with us and work with the same colors, and also see if we could turn the designs of the paintings into art pieces. Eventually, this became part of even of a major fashion campaign, which we had a lot of these brands will just use your image of your street art and not pay you for it. So then you have to get a lawyer and run behind these fashion brands and see if you can get some money for it to go back into the projects also. Next step, Curacao, another Caribbean island where we worked with young people on workshops and see how we can get different locations around the city transformed. And I think it's very fun to think and work with colors, because colors are abstract, and it's a great way for getting people to work together, because once you start thinking about figurative art and you start thinking about depictions, like for instance in Philadelphia we had many meetings in the communities, what should we paint on these walls? And then some people were like, you should paint a picture of Martin Luther King, and then the other person in the room would say, no, if you have Martin Luther King then people will know you're in the ghetto. And it becomes very complicated because a lot of people want to see different things. So when you decide to just work with color or abstraction, that process becomes easier and people feel more involved, and less people feel excluded by the subject matter. Most people like to work and see colors anyway. And we had the opportunity to think about the school building in Curacao and what could we do with colors on that. And again, taking inspiration from local colors and local fabrics that they make and use. This is fabrics that are actually coming from India, but they use in a festival for their harvest festival when they all dress up very bright colors. So we use this thing that would be recognized by the people there and turn that into a design for painting the buildings. And again, this building we painted with local students of the school, but also people coming out young people who are in the prison system, that we could help somehow through work and experience come out and reintegrate into society. And as you can see, it's quite complicated to execute these designs, and it's wonderful if we can transfer that knowledge onto the local youth and see how that for them could develop into their career decisions, or how they, think about what they want to do in life. And the same principle for this design we transferred into other neighborhoods that needed some attention, and we were able to apply this way of color thinking to several locations around the city, where we worked with locals to see if we could make some of these neighborhoods that were, they needed attention, and then we could maybe, through these artworks, we could maybe spark that. In 2016, we were invited to work with refugees in refugee camps in Greece, and we didn't really have a wall surface, but because this was an old military base, we had a lot of concrete floor surface or asphalt. And we had to think of how we could, in a few days, I think we were there for 2 days, think about how we could make something with the children there. And since most of these refugees were Syrian, we decided to use some of the geometric patterns that are common in their mosques and see if we could make something like that happen on the floor surface. And the cool thing is with these geometric patterns is you don't have to measure. You can build the whole thing by creating circles. So you just make a nail into the ground with some wire. You create circles and lines. And together with some of these very smart young kids, Syrian refugees, we created these complex geometric patterns, which instantly turned into like a playground for some of these kids that didn't have much to do in this refugee camp. So that was an amazing experience. And that idea we actually transported into more projects where we worked with refugees, and we were able to take these patterns and make art installations. Like these is this temporary drawing on the floor made with chalk paint, so that would rain. If the rain would come, that would go away again. And I think all that ideas about working together, how can you use colors or designs to make things that are interactive, how you can involve people in the process, is something that we always thought was very important. And this is an exhibition, for instance, where people and children could make their own art with colors that are already available. I got running out of time, so I'm going to take a sip of water. This is the painting we made in 2008, as I've shown you before, but 10 years later, this painting didn't look so good anymore, just like before. So we decided also to go back and see if we can recreate this painting, but this time in mosaic. And we had some funding, so because we had just done an advertising with Johnny Walker, where they used our project in the campaign. So we had some money, and we were on a very ambitious plan to recreate the whole painting in mosaics. We trained a team of women in the technique of mosaic making, and we started working on it. The houses around it, which were not painted, we decided to plaster, this time with colored plaster, so that's plaster with pigment inside it, so it cannot come off like paint will do. And we combined that with ceramic tiles to create new designs for these houses. A much larger team this time. We were, by this time, working with around 20 people to make this happen, and to develop these new techniques, which is much more intensive than just painting. And here you can see how a house is transformed from raw brick into something which looks more like architecturally organized and a good way to present a house, and kind of thinking about a new style that could work for informal housing. How you could create a style that you could apply to any house. More before and after pictures. And this is, for instance, you show the designs to a resident and just have discussions about the colors. And here it's a WhatsApp group between and most of, after a while we were not staying in Rio, but this was happening mostly at a distance. So we had trained our whole team to organize these things, the finances, the administration, the communication, the materials, all that stuff happened locally by crews that were trained, and we were at a distance in Holland, but we would get these screenshots from these WhatsApp groups. We're saying, oh no, I like it, but no pink on my house. Okay, we'll make it yellow. These kinds of conversations. So this is what it looked like nearing the end. Unfortunately, we ran out of funding, and we were not able to complete this project by the end. But it was a very interesting phase, and I think architecturally it's interesting because you go from something which is painting and just on a surface that you apply to a building, you really create something that becomes part of the architecture. And hopefully, we hope that maybe people would adopt this style and of colored plaster and tiling. But this being an informal community, you'll maybe have worked weeks on this wall, and then somebody comes and just breaks it and makes a door out of it, and doesn't even talk to you about it. So you have this nice part of an informal community where you don't have rules and things organize things by themselves in a social manner, but at the same time you run into conflicts like this, and you have to just, especially as an outsider coming from the organized world, you just have to accept these kinds of changes. So I think that's the most important. The next images are some smaller projects where actually here I had an opportunity to paint in Denver, North America, and I invited some of my friends from Philadelphia and from Rio to work together on this mural project. So that was amazing, because then the people in Rio met these people in Denver, and they were coming from similar circumstances but in a different country. And later I started working also with children, refugee children in Holland. I traveled all over Holland to do workshops with some of the refugees that were coming to Holland. And here also some workshop with homeless people, where again, making these patterns and very rewarding work. And this is the last project I want to show you, which is a project that I did in Austria, in Salzburg, with a children's hospital, where the children in the hospital were able to work on the design with me. And we created this idea of, can we make a design that represents music somehow? So we invited a musician to talk about how sound works, and the children would then make drawings and design based on sound. And we made models and took the children through the whole process with us to make this design for the mural. Yeah, and that's about it. That's my adventure. Thank you.
Thank you very much as well. It was truly inspiring. I'm pretty sure we can say that art will save the world at some point, right?
There's an artist who says that, I think.
Въпроси от публиката имаме ли към нашия гост лектор?
Hi, so I got a question for you. In the first panel, we were talking about urban communities and all of the problems that they had. And we saw the research, we saw the problems. But now we see a result. We see a way that we can improve on the communities. And my question is, how do you start with that? How did you start with the boy with a kite? How can I or anyone else in this panel actually start a movement like that to help out their community? Do you just go down the street, talk with a grandma and say, hi, I want to paint your house pink. How do you get the funding? How do you do the logistics of a project like that?
Yeah, it depends on the scale, of course, of your idea. If your idea is relatively small, like the first painting we did, then it's not that complicated. The most important thing is that you need to somehow find a way to be accepted and embraced by the community. So that depends on where you're doing it. If you're doing it in your own country, that is not so hard. But if you're going to a different country and you're an outsider, then you have to take more time, and then you have to, I guess, find the right people who are leaders in the community, who are already organizing things. Because the worst thing you can do is, I think, go to a place and see, I'm going to organize this when there's already people organizing things. So you should not bypass anybody who is working with similar intentions. You should find those people and see if you can somehow latch onto their initiatives, use their network, and start a collaboration like that. I think that's probably the most important lesson that we learned, is that especially as an outsider, find whoever is already putting energy into improving the circumstances in a community, and see if you can help them help you, or the other way around. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for your lecture. It was very interesting. My question is related to the first part of the lecture, where you mentioned that you involved youth in the project. So you mentioned that you did this through identifying the local community leaders, and I'm interested to know, how did you identify the local community leaders, let's say, and also What was your role actually in involving youth? To what extent did you participate? And what were the biggest challenges working with this particular kind of young people? So yeah, I'm curious to know more about it. Thank you.
For the first part, I think I was lucky because I knew somebody. I had heard a show on the radio, on Dutch radio, of a Dutch person who was working in favelas in Rio, organizing things, creating community centers, trying to get the young people out of the criminality. And I heard this radio show, I wrote down his name, and I started looking for him. And I found him, so I called him up and I said, well, I'm coming to Rio, I want to do some research on doing projects. He invited us, and so since he was already doing this work, it was very easy for him to say, okay, yeah, you can work here, I'll make sure that the drug gang or the drug boss is okay with you guys being here, I'll talk to him and get permission for you to do the first project. And he identified which youth would be good for us to work with. So we kind of didn't have to do much that first time. We found the person that was already organizing, and we found the youth and we started working with them. As in, what are the challenges of working with young people? I did not think that was ever really that challenging, because if you were in a neighborhood where there's so little to do and there's so little options, and in some of these neighborhoods these kids don't even ever leave. Like in Rio, of course you have beautiful beaches and stuff, and some of these kids hardly ever go to the beach. And the same in Philadelphia, like where we were working, some people had never left the city. So if you come there and you have an opportunity, something exciting, teamwork, something that they might feel also would put them in a higher standing with their other community members, it's quite easy to involve people. But of course, life is challenging, and as I showed before, you know, you cannot hold on to people or young people who maybe have too much energy for this kind of work that needs patience, and they might go back into the drug gang. And we've lost some people like that. So those are the challenges are just the challenges of the neighborhood, the violence, the poverty, the lack of opportunities.
Thank you for your amazing presentation, which is, its transferability and applicability is relevant in so many contexts. It's really amazing. And you mentioned that the impact of your work has not always been so far-reaching as you wished, that you couldn't change so many things that you wished, but still, can you elaborate what you managed to change in the life of the people, and especially in terms of making them more aware or concerned with the public environment? Probably some of them fought to legalize their houses. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, thank you for your question. I think quite early on we realized that we should not have the ambition or the expectations that our project would have real significant substantial change. So we abandoned that idea, and we never, and that made it, in that way we made sure that we would never make false promises and promise that through a painting like this we could get everybody to go to school or get everybody to come out of crime. So I don't think we were in that sense disappointed that we didn't make these large-scale changes. But the thing is that we still always get this question: was your project able to reduce crime, or did more people go to school, or did people formalize the ownership of their house, or stuff like that? So I think the real impact that you make is more on a soft level, where especially the people that are on your team or the families of the people that are on your team, that is a big impact in somebody's life. If you're growing up young and nobody ever sees you except as maybe a danger or a threat, or somebody without a future. If you take a young person like that and you give them the right kind of attention and you say, well, let's together work on something and together we make this huge project happen, that can be life-changing. And especially that can change the perception of a person, especially a group of people that then feel that they have the power to do something about the circumstances in their neighborhood. So these can be small things. If you can take a group of people that all kind of feel like they are victimized by society, that they don't have any agency or way to change their lives, and you can say, well, what if we work together and we at least change this street? And we start thinking about the trash in the street, and we start thinking about small problems like that, and we start thinking about how we can get the young people to stay out of crime, because there are other opportunities. You know, you can become a painter. You can at least you're learning how to organize things and work together. Those are the major impacts, I think, and that extends itself to the people whose houses you're painting, who also feel involved, and then that extends itself to the newspaper that starts writing about this neighborhood in a positive light, where normally, you know, this neighborhood is called Villa Cruzeiro, where we did most of the work. If you were in Rio and people asked you, where are you from? And you say, I'm from Villa Cruzeiro, people would go like that. And some people would even stop talking to you. Like, no, you're from that area where they killed that journalist, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it has such a stigma that people really don't want to talk to you. And now after all these newspapers and being on the news and the television, that gives people a new sense of pride, which I think is very important. And it's very important that people don't identify favela as something bad, but they start to identify, no, favela is something cool. You know, we organize ourselves, we build our own cities, we have our own music, we have our own culture. And I hope that our project somehow contributed to that idea.
Hello, here. Hi. Thanks for sharing some really inspiring examples, and it's nice to see that creativity and hope are really important, because then you can see new opportunities, and that's also the examples you shared. I think in many of your examples, almost in all of them, your focus has been really on engagement with local populations. So my question is on twofold. One is, what are, and you talk about it a lot, but maybe also for you to maybe a little bit more concretely share some of your values for your engagement with these communities and populations, because that also sets the tone. And in all of your work, you really focus on their capacities, how to work with them, and what do they find important, and maybe then on the other side, what were in some of these neighborhoods. I think in one of your first examples you shared that in the favela there were a lot of good vibes. So what are these good vibes?
There were a lot of what?
Good vibes.
Yeah.
Good energy. I think you used the word good energy. So then on the other side, what are these good vibes and good energies, that the values that you see there in these more informal populations? Okay, yeah, I think I'll start with the second part of your question. I think, you know, in Europe or in most of the Western world, we are very used to planning, organizing large systems, large constructions of thought that surround us, rule making, and this is also results in a society which makes us way more individualistic. Every family is one unit, and there is less interaction between families, between neighbors, between streets. So what we saw, learning about the favelas, coming there and walking around and getting to know people, is that is way more diffuse. So families are maybe, you know, your neighbors and the people living in the streets around you.
that structure is way more intertwined. So you look after each other's children because they play in the same street, and maybe, you know, somebody will have to go to work, the kids will stay around, and the kids will hang around with the neighbor or with the grandma or with the neighbor's grandma. Older kids will look out for the younger kids. And if you don't have all this formal social structures of, you know, welfare or somebody in the government where you can go to ask for this or that or get this money or get that permission, you always have to look at each other. You know, if you're building your house and maybe you're building it right in front of the window of somebody else, you're going to have to talk to them. You can't find some kind of rule in a book somewhere to see if you can build like that. So you'll have to go into conversation with each other. And of course, this is not always simple. This leads to conflict as well. But in a favela, if you get a conflict, you cannot go to the police. So you go to the drug leader. And the drug leader will say, well, okay, you sit there, we'll talk about it. And we'll figure it out. And of course, this does not always work. But there is an advantage to working without rules, to working informally, because every decision is made on a personal level with a conversation and not with a rule somewhere written on paper which will take a decision for you. So I think there's advantages to that, and it leads to an atmosphere of social intertwinement that is very overwhelming when you come to these communities. And I think that is not just in Rio, but that is all around the world where you find people who are struggling to live. Through that struggle, you get a lot of creativity and you get a lot of people helping each other too. So that's something maybe we've lost in our societies, where we depend on our rules, we depend on our books, we think everything will be taken care of, and it makes us kind of stupid. And so the first question was about the values of working with young people. I think our strongest value was always that we wanted not to be in the spotlight too much ourselves, which is hard because when people interview you or invite you, they say, oh, you're the artist, you have to be in the spotlight. But we always try to push our painters and the people who are working with us to the forefront and say, no, you do the interview. This is about you. We want you to get that picture or be on the news or whatever. And the other, I think, thing is, I also said in my talk was that we never had anybody working for free. We always thought, you know, this has to be a working opportunity. And wherever we could, we even had the people working for us, we helped them set up a small business so they could have it officially go through the paperwork. And in a place like Brazil, you have something as a carta assinada, which means if you're working that you have a paper that shows that. And that is very important there, because if you have a paper that shows you're working, it also shows you're not working in the informal drug trade or other informal criminal things. So if as a young person you can show the police that you have that, it puts you in a completely different space. You are working in the official space, not in the unofficial space. In the unofficial space, you're practically a criminal. So we really try to see if we could, in any way we could, officialize their existence and make it, you know, put them on a path towards professionalism instead of a path towards clandestine activities. I hope that answers that question. I'm sure I could go on for a long time about that subject, but